So before we want to get started, I want to give a huge shout out to Susan and Alana and Eliana, the people here at Tennings Point. What an incredible place we have here in Beacon. They do such tremendous work. Thank you so much, Susan, for hosting us and helping to produce this series with me for Fort Beacon Studios. I also want to give a big shout out to the Beacon Historical Society. Yes. Susan has asked that you make an effort to provide some donations in the box at the back on your way out, and 100% of those donations will go to the Historical Society. So thank you, Susan, for that, and thank you, Beacon Historical Society. All right, so it is my profound pleasure to introduce to you this gentleman sitting next to me, an officer of the United States Army, active duty since 1995, yes. An enlisted paratrooper, an armor officer, and a military advisor, and a history professor at the United States Military Academy, yes. Mr. Colonel Sean Sculley. Yeah! I did have it memorized. Yeah. Awesome. And also, we are so incredibly fortunate here in Beacon because one of Sean's profound interests and expertise is in the American Revolution. And here we are at the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Now, we had our first episode back on February 22nd, and that was George Washington's birthday. And that episode really focused a lot on how critical the American Revolution and this area was to everything that was going on. So Beacon has so much that happened, and Fishkill and this whole area was so relevant to the American Revolution. We were going to host the second episode on June 21st, and for those of you that were going to come on June 21st, you're welcome, because it was about 150 degrees in here. So Susan rightly decided we made the choice to postpone, and so here we are. So it is now November 1st, and we want to talk about, tonight is really going to be about sort of the origins of the American Revolution. And before we jump into this, Sean, I want to do a little sort of culture setting and remind folks why it is that you focus and have such a desire to learn and understand so much about the American Revolution.
Okay, so as I have said before when we talked last time, ever since I was a kid, I've been in love with history. I've been in love with trying to understand what was going on in the past. In particular, it was always, I was 10, it was about castles, to be honest. I was very interested in castles and ruins and understanding why people did what they did a long time ago, and trying to also understand how we got where we are today, because I think our past is so relevant to trying to answer those questions. And I started out really I was interested in British history and European history to begin with. But when the Academy first accepted my application to teach, they told me that I was going to teach American history. And I had actually grown up outside the US for much of my life, and I knew a lot more about European history than I did American history. And so I chose colonial America because that's British history in America. So that's kind of how I got started. And then from there, I got into the American Revolution by studying colonial America, and I kept asking, but what happens next? But what happens next? And eventually next became the American Revolution, and that's how I got into it.
Nice. And so talking about what happens next, let's go back to before what happens next. Let's talk about how did, so 250 years ago, right now, what's going on? Like, how are we leading up? Well, before now, right? Like this time last year, I guess, we're leading up to the revolution and what's going to kick it off, right? So what's happening then? How is this forming?
Okay, so a year from 1775, what's happening is Boston is being occupied by a British military force. The reason that they're being occupied is because they have decided that they were going to dump a bunch of tea in a harbor outside of Boston as a form of resistance to taxation that they believed was unconstitutional. Now, when I talk about constitutional, unconstitutional, we're talking the British Constitution. So their belief in their rights as British citizens would mean that they should only be taxed by their own government, and to them, their government was in America. was in their colonies. So whether it's the General Court of Massachusetts or the House of Burgesses in Virginia, that's the only legislature that has a right, from their perspective, to tax them. Parliament does not. And so they're resisting parliamentary acts that are coming from London that are taxing them in order to help pay the empire back for the debt that had been accrued during the French and Indian War about 10 to 12 years earlier. But from their perspective, because they don't vote for any representation in Parliament, Parliament doesn't have the right, according to the British Constitution, to tax them.
Okay, so the Boston Tea Party happens.
And it's not the only Tea Party, by the way. It's just the most famous.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was also a New York Tea Party.
Really?
There were several of these movements.
All right at the same time?
They're all happening around the same time, and they're all orchestrated by the Sons of Liberty in various areas to resist this tax.
Okay, great. So this happens, right?
Yes.
And what happens next?
Well, that caused a lot of consternation back in London because the East India Company, which was running all of that tea, just lost a whole bunch of money. So Parliament decides that they are going to punish Boston in particular and Massachusetts more broadly by passing a series of acts that the British government, not so coyly, called the coercive acts. So anytime, if you ever think about like an act that is really in your face about what it wants to do, the coercive acts are probably top of your list, right? We are going to coerce you to do what we want you to do. And the way we're going to do that is, one, we're going to close your harbor. So we're going to shut down all your economic activity. Two, we're going to outlaw your government. So we're going to shut down the Massachusetts Colonial Assembly, the General Court. Three, we're going to occupy your city with 2 regiments from the British Army, and their job is to make sure that you follow the rules. And finally, we're going to make you pay for their quartering. Right? So we are going to directly tax you. We're going to make you pay to house these soldiers that are occupying your city.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that the occupation part is also an expense, right? So, and you had mentioned when we were talking earlier that people did consider that a tax.
Oh,
that
100%.
That was an expense.
Yeah, and this was not the first time that they had done this, that the British government had done that. They had actually passed a quartering act earlier that had been resisted in New York City as well.
And so even though this is happening also in other places, which is news to me, did the British do the same thing with these other ports, with these other locations, or just Boston?
This set of acts are specifically targeted at Boston, at Massachusetts, because the British Empire, the members of Parliament believe that Boston and Massachusetts has become a hotbed of radicalism. There has been resistance prior to this, all the way from 1765 with the Stamp Act crisis that begins then, that is colonial resistance to that tax. So there's been resistance over time, but by 1774, they believe that really the center of all of this is in Boston.
So there's sort of, I think this is interesting too, that there is sort of a growing sort of momentum that's happening here with the Stamp Act and the taxation there with our representation, and it sort of is culminating. And then the Boston Tea Party in that moment is sort of a inflection point, right? And then the British respond, and so then what happens next? How do we respond?
Okay, so at this point, what the New Englanders start doing is stealing and storing gunpowder. So they basically start going everywhere they know gunpowder is stored, and they're taking it and squirreling it away in hidden places in the event that they will have to resist by violence. Gunpowder is not, at this time, produced in America. So all the gunpowder that exists in America is coming from Europe and has been left over from the French and Indian War. So there is in fact, there's a powder house outside of Boston. There are arms storage areas all throughout New England. In fact, because of the French and Indian War, New England is actually the most heavily armed society in America. They have the most guns, and because they had participated so heavily in the French and Indian War. And so they're trying to take all of that and make sure that the British can't seize it.
Okay.
and they're storing it in different places, which is where Concord comes into the story in April of 1775. But there are storage areas in New Hampshire, storage areas in Connecticut, and the British are attempting to seize them all in these nighttime raids. And they succeed the first time in November of 1774, and the Sons of Liberty are then on to them. Right? So they have spies, they're paying attention to what the royal governor, who's also the military commander, Thomas Gage, what he's planning on doing. And so then he attempts to seize more gunpowder in New Hampshire in December of 74, but they get there before he does, and they actually set up a barrier of civilians. And they're like, are you gonna shoot us? And they start heckling the soldiers, and they run them off.
Oh, wow.
And then Thomas Gage is like, okay, well, that doesn't work. So then he tries again at Salem. And at Salem, the people actually pull up a drawbridge and won't let the British cross into the storage area where they have everything. And when the commander threatens to shoot at them, a preacher actually stands in front of the guns, the soldiers' muskets, and says, "Shoot me first."
Oh, wow.
And again, the British soldiers are forced to leave.
It is intriguing that there's not any gunfire during this. There's not. How does that? Why is that?
Yet.
Not yet. Of course, not yet. But I'm surprised that they were so reserved. I mean, they're obviously, they feel they're ready to fight, but they're not firing their guns.
Well, I think what they're daring the British soldiers to actually fire first.
Okay. That makes sense.
And you have to also remember that back in March of 1770, there was gunfire in the streets of Boston that famously Paul Revere makes known as the Boston Massacre.
Okay.
Right, where we have civilians, they're protesting British soldiers that are in Boston. It's well before the Coercive Acts, but they're in Boston and they're taking jobs away from Bostonians because British soldiers don't get paid a lot. So when they enlist for life, and life for them is 20 years. So they enlist for 20 years, and then they're allowed to retire at that point. They don't get paid a lot of money. They get paid 6 pence a day, but then their food and their clothing gets deducted from that.
Oh, wow.
So they make much less. And so they're allowed to moonlight.
Okay.
And in moonlighting in Boston, they're taking jobs from Bostonian working class people because they'll work for less because they're already getting paid something.
Interesting.
And that is where the protest comes that leads to the Boston Massacre. These workers are protesting the soldiers being in Boston and this tension between working class soldiers and working class people who work the wharfs, who work sailors, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And so when they start throwing snowballs that have rocks in them, the soldiers then respond by shooting, and that leads to the Boston Massacre.
Okay, so Boston Massacre, but then getting back to where we were, the first shot is Lexington, right?
It's Lexington on April 19th.
Of 1775.
Of 1775. So
Okay.
all of this, basically, think of the tension as just ratcheting up.
Yeah.
It's just getting more and more. Sometimes I ask my students to graph the tension of the imperial crisis because that's very scientific. And they'll do a graph and it'll dip down, but then it'll go up more, and then it'll dip down and it'll go up more. And I ask them to put the event at the peak before it comes back down. How would you do that? And every single time we talk about this, it starts in 1763, and it just 65 is the Stamp Act, and 70 is the Boston Massacre, and 74 is the Boston Tea Party, right? It just keeps getting worse. And Thomas Gage doesn't make it any better by conducting military raids into the countryside, trying to seize gunpowder, basically telling the people of Massachusetts, not only do I not trust you, but I want to make sure I disarm you as quickly as possible. And that all comes across as a form of tyranny to these people.
I want to remind people who Thomas Gage is, but before we do that, I forgot to mention that the opinions of Colonel Sculley this evening are not a representation of the United States Army, the Department of Defense, or the Military Academy of West Point.
That's true. Thank you. Yeah.
Forgot about that little detail. Okay.
We're good.
So
let me back up.
Yes.
Thomas Gage.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, Royal Governor.
So Thomas Gage is a military officer. He's a general in the British Army. He is also, once the Coercive Acts go into effect, he is not only named the military commander of all British forces in North America, but the royal governor of Massachusetts.
Okay.
So Massachusetts is effectively under martial law at this point in time.
Okay. Great.
So
we lead up to Lexington.
So this all leads up to Lexington, because what the colonials have been doing in Massachusetts is taking all the gunpowder that they can find, and they're pushing it further and further into the colony, further and further away from Boston. And one of the largest caches that they have is in Concord, Massachusetts. Thomas Gage knows this because there is an American spy spying for the British among the Sons of Liberty. So the Sons of Liberty in Boston are very active. They're running the show mostly out in the countryside. And they're composed of some names many of us would know. Paul Revere, let's see, Joseph Warren, Dr. Joseph Warren, Samuel Adams. But also among them is Dr. Benjamin Church. And Church is actually a British spy. So Church is reporting all of the goings on in these secret meetings that are happening in I think the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, back to Thomas Gage. Now, what the British don't know is that the Americans also have a spy.
Okay.
So Thomas Gage was in America during the French and Indian War, and he fell in love with an American colonial woman. Her name is Margaret, and Margaret and her family, because of her family ties, she is torn between this tension. And as far as we can tell, she's actually reporting what her husband is doing to Joseph Warren.
Oh, wow.
So the news is going back, and everybody knows what everybody's doing.
Yeah, yeah. And so Lexington, is this the Paul Revere ride that leads up to Lexington?
That's
so
right.
Margaret tells somebody, does she tell Paul Revere? Do we know?
No.
Okay.
I think she's telling Joseph Warren.
Okay.
So Margaret is basically, Thomas Gage comes up with a plan to seize all of this gunpowder in Concord. And he is afraid to take his soldiers through certain parts of Massachusetts because he thinks it's too dangerous. So he decides he's going to go to Concord through Lexington because he believes that he can do so faster and he can do so before they get engaged by any militiamen. Now in Massachusetts, they've set up these companies of young men known as Minutemen. Have we heard of the Minutemen? I think we've all heard of them, right? Okay, but these are basically the young men of the militia who can arrive at a minute's notice should they find out that the British are coming to their town to seize gunpowder. That's their job.
Okay.
But every man in every town in Massachusetts from the age of 16 to 60 is in the militia, has been training, has a gun, a musket, is ready to stand and resist should they need to. So the plan is, when Gage begins to move his soldiers out of Boston, Paul Revere, along with many other Sons of Liberty, will ride throughout the countryside to warn them. And because they have a spy of their own, they know that the soldiers are going to Concord, Massachusetts. And it's a big contingent. It's 840 soldiers.
Oh, wow. Wow. So there's the big famous ride that British are coming.
The British are coming.
Yeah.
Which he doesn't really ride through town yelling the British are coming. That did not happen.
Not quite like a Broadway musical.
If any of you remember the poem that we had to learn, one if by land, two if by sea. So that did happen. So they had basically a visual signaling system on the North Church of Boston. They were going to hang lamps. One if by land, two if by sea. So one lamp signaled that the British Army was coming by land. Two lamps if they were coming by sea. So on the night of April the 18th, when all of these soldiers begin to leave, Paul Revere does actually go to the North Church. He tells the young men that are there, hang one lamp. He gets in a rowboat, rows across the harbor. There's a horse waiting for him. There are also two other men that are waiting, and they all ride off. There are also two or three more men that ride off at another gate outside of Roxbury, and they head off as well. So they've got redundancy plans.
And are they literally shouting out, the British are coming, the British
No,
are coming?
they're not. What
No,
they're doing
okay.
is they are riding to people's homes
Yeah.
that they know are sympathetic to their cause
Yeah.
and saying, hey, they're coming, get the militia out.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get as far ahead of these soldiers as they can. But the problem is he actually had to go around them. So he makes it to Lexington first, which is why Lexington's militia is ready to meet the British at 5 a.m. on April 19th. Nobody attempts to stop them before that because he can't get out far enough in front of them.
Interesting.
And in fact, he barely makes it.
And what happens when they get there? It's 5 a.m.
So it's
the British
5
show up.
a.m. Paul Revere is actually still in the house where he has told Captain John Parker, hey, get your soldiers out on the green. He hasn't had a chance to leave yet. Parker has gotten his militia out onto the green. Now, if you ever go to Lexington, the green's still there. The homes are still there. And it forms a U of homes around the green. And these militiamen line up on the green, and their job is to delay the British. They're trying to give the men at Concord time to get the gunpowder out. So they line up. It's about 30 men that line up in rows, and they wait for the British to arrive. And when the British arrive early in the morning, the British come with a vanguard, like a forward force on horseback with light infantry. And they stop because they're being opposed, and they weren't expecting to be opposed. They stop. A young commander rides back to his commander, who is a major by the name of Pitcairn, and he asks him what to do. And Pitcairn says, just ride around them, right? They're British subjects, just ride around them. And he comes forward to tell his men to do that, but before doing so, he yells at the militia to put down their arms. And Parker looks at his men, looks at the size of the British force, and tells his men to march off the green. Now, not to put down their arms, to march off the green. As they turn to march off, a shot goes off. No historian knows for certain who fired that shot. We don't know if it was a British soldier who was panicking. We don't know if it was an American who, just didn't know how to handle his own firearm and shot up in the air. We don't know if it was somebody who was hiding somewhere that wanted to start things. We don't know who it was, but as soon as that happened, the light infantry deploys and begins firing into the American militia. 10 men are killed, 10 men are wounded. 2 of the men who die, actually, they're a father and son, actually crawl to the front steps of their house, which is on the green, and die there in front of their wife/mother.
I just find that, I think, we're talking about this at sort of a 30,000-foot view. It's 250 years later. And I just think that we don't think enough about these individual lives. they were literally like in their front, in the green of their town, standing there, seeing the British coming at them. And I'm so fascinated by that. I don't think about it in those terms.
Yeah. Well,
and the community that was going on. We were talking, it's like, these were people who the night before had been at the pub on the corner or at the church on the other corner. I just am so fascinated by that.
Yeah, and in fact, many of the wounded are dragged back into that pub, right, that morning when they're wounded to be tended. I think understanding that and thinking about them as individuals is important to understanding the anger and the rage that results from this event.
Yeah.
Because, look, there's not a lot of people let me restate that. There's not a lot of colonists in North America if we consider the size of, say, New York City. So there's about 2 million people across all 13 colonies. There's 8 million people in New York City, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's not a lot of people. It's not that everybody knew everybody, but they almost did.
And the fact that they had the ability to communicate and to organize. I'm also fascinated by that, right? They didn't have phones. They didn't have, they couldn't call each other up or text each other and be like, we got to get going. There was this really intense sense of collective, gathering and community to really fend off and collectively fight against this, which I also find really pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And this is all, these modes of communication, this way of organizing, all of this infrastructure is laid is laid during the French and Indian War and during the imperial crisis that followed. They're actually practicing this resistance.
Which is highly ironic, right? Because weren't they in collaboration with the British during that?
They were.
And now here we
are.
are.
And they were proud to be a part of the British.
Yeah, yeah.
They were helping the British Army fight the French because, they were terrible Catholics. And so,
Aren't we all?
Yeah, aren't we all? And so you're right. They're all about that, right? But that's a part of why they're resisting, because they believe that as Englishmen they have these rights, like they hold on to these. They believe that they're not being treated in the way that they should be because of their citizenship, if you will.
And not being given the right to thrive and to build their own economies and things like that in the way that they desire to.
Right.
Okay, so Lexington happens and then we move on.
So now the British Army just keeps marching, this force of 840, keep marching, but they're marching now to Concord. Meanwhile, riders have ridden to Connecticut. They have ridden to New Hampshire. They have ridden all throughout the rest of Massachusetts. And they are encouraging militias in all of these towns to swarm on Concord to stop the British. Now, the British can't stop any of that. They're moving in, and what they don't realize is the door is shutting behind them to get back to Boston. So as they move into Concord, there's actually a large contingent of American militiamen waiting for them just by the North Bridge. And they've already moved all of the gunpowder out. It's already gone. But they decide to get back at the British soldiers for shooting men at Lexington.
Yeah.
And so they don't wait. They begin firing on the British.
And how many days are we talking Lexington to Concord? Like, what's that time period?
About an hour and a half. It's not that far.
Wow. So again, just think of like, how are people organizing and able to communicate in such a collective way to make that happen and get, it's mind-boggling.
It's really not that far. So once they get there, the Americans actually start firing on them. And the rage has been building, I think, for a long time. And so, in fact, there is an account of a British soldier who is wounded, laying on the North Bridge, and an American comes out from where the militia has been defending its position with a tomahawk and actually kills that British soldier and then scalps him.
Wow.
Now, my guess is that soldier probably served in the French and Indian War as a ranger. That was not uncommon for them to fight that way. And so that's a possibility, but we don't know exactly who it is. And the British are terrified at this point. They didn't expect to be fired upon. They're actually repelled by that gunfire. They can't do anything. And so they turn around to go back to Boston, and the rest of the day is hell, literally hell for them. All of these militia that are coming from all of these other colonies are converging on the road to Boston, and they are lining the road. So the road has nothing but these rock walls on either side, or it will be trees. There'll be these small villages, and they're coming and firing on them and then leaving and then leapfrogging another unit and resetting their weapons, rearming themselves, getting behind another wall and firing again.
Wow.
Of the 840 soldiers that leave Boston, almost 300 of them are killed or wounded on the way back from
British
Boston.
soldiers.
British soldiers.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So they get back to Boston. How do we get to Bunker Hill, the Battle of Bunker Hill?
Well, so this is April.
Okay, yeah.
Bunker Hill is in June.
Okay.
In between April and June, all of these New England colonies answer the call to bring in militiamen, and Boston is soon surrounded by 20,000 soldiers.
Wow.
Now, to give you some idea, Boston had 16,000 citizens. So there are more soldiers outside of Boston than there are people who live in Boston. Many of the people who lived in Boston leave.
Yeah.
And now the British Army is surrounded. What's
the British Army presence in Boston?
At that point, the British Army had about 4,500 soldiers in Boston.
Okay.
Minus the wounded and killed from that day on April 19th. However, as soon as Thomas Gage reports what has happened to London, London sends reinforcements. So another 4,500 soldiers come to Boston over the Atlantic with 3 new generals. General William Howe, General Henry Clinton, and General John Burgoyne. Now, these are all names that will matter throughout the rest of the Revolution for the British, but William Howe is the most important at this moment. Howe still answers to Thomas Gage, but Parliament trusts Howe more than Gage. It's Howe's job to figure out how to break the British out of Boston and how to stop the Americans, and that's what leads to the Battle of Bunker Hill.
And what is the process of, getting all of the colonial troops there? The other colonies start to respond. They're like showing up as well. What is going on there? How's that happening?
Well, I often, this is actually my area of expertise, which means I could get really in the weeds and it could get really boring. And I don't want that to happen. Let's just leave it at, because of the amount of military experience that exists in the New England colonies due to the French and Indian War, these governments and the men who are put in charge know how to form armies. They have formed regiments, they have fought in regiments, they have disbanded regiments for 7 years from 1755 to 1763. And they didn't forget how to do that. Many of the names outside of Boston that are in charge are names that if you studied the French and Indian War, you would know them. Whether it's Seth Pomeroy, Israel Putnam, Rufus Putnam, Thomas Knowlton, and the list goes on, William Prescott.
I recognize all of those names.
All of these names, of course you do. All of these men served in the French and Indian War, some of them as enlisted soldiers, but some of them as captains, as lieutenants. They learned, they understood how to do this. So they organized these soldiers into these regiments based on colonies.
Yeah.
They put Artemus Ward in charge because he's the highest ranking Massachusetts officer, and Massachusetts was seen as the senior colony.
Okay.
So he's put in charge, and then he starts to try to instill discipline. So he outlaws prostitution, he outlaws gambling, he outlaws drinking. Remember, I know. Hey, the Puritans are still in charge in Massachusetts at this point in time, right? And then he actually starts drilling the soldiers. He starts teaching them, because you've got a lot of young men there, 16, 17, 18 years old. I mean, David Howe is one of them. I've read his diary. It's awesome. Yeah. He's on a lark as far as he's concerned. He's 16 years old. He comes with a great musket because it was his dad's. It was in great condition. So you know what he does? He sells it. Right? He sells it. He makes a lot of money. He then goes and buys an even better musket, right? And then he uses that to borrow some money so that he can do a little gambling, make some money back.
Yeah.
He loans some money to his lieutenant. He's a private. That's really not the right way to go. So he can hold that over his platoon leader later on. And then he tells a story about 2 men who decided to bet on who could drink the most the fastest. Apparently one passed out, the other died. So there's a lot going on around here. I mean, you have a lot of young men who don't know what they're doing. Yeah. You have a lot of older men who do. They realize it's not a lark. So Artemus Ward starts drilling. He starts training them how to fire their muskets. And then he also has to worry about hygiene. He has to actually make it a law that they have to bathe once a week. Makes a law that they have to dig latrines outside their camp, not inside. Those kinds of things.
And do they believe that they are leading up to the Battle of Bunker Hill, or does that just happen? Are they thinking they're entering into this big conflict?
The senior leaders understand that the British are going to try to break out.
Okay.
Thomas Gage attempts it once, it doesn't go anywhere. So they know. Their problem is that the Americans have very little, almost no artillery. Again, nobody's making cannons in America at this time. So if you want to have artillery, you got to steal it, or you got to have somebody else send it to you. And France isn't anywhere close to being in the picture yet. Mm-hmm. There are cannon up at Ticonderoga, but that's a story for another time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so they only have their muskets and their bodies to stop the British from breaking out at this point in time. But they still have spies. So when William Howe comes up with a plan to break out, they know about it. The plan is on June 18th to use the British Navy to move soldiers across the water over to Dorchester Heights, place artillery on Dorchester Heights. Remember that, people. We'll come to that later next time. It's going to be used against them. And therefore drive the Americans out of Roxbury, drive them out of Cambridge. But the Americans find out about it. They don't have any cannon to put on Dorchester Heights. So what they decide is, fine, we'll build a fort somewhere else and make them have to come attack us there. And so they begin to fortify Breed's Hill.
Okay. Not Bunker Hill.
We don't know why. Okay, they were told to fortify Bunker Hill.
Okay.
Bunker Hill is awesome. It's 110 feet high. It's steep. It commands Roxbury and Cambridge and parts of Boston. It's perfect. And the Americans don't go there. Instead, the night of the 16th, they go to Breed's Hill. And they begin to build a fort there, which is past Bunker Hill. It's still on the same peninsula. Charlestown is just past it. And they build a fort there. It's called a redoubt. It's basically a rectangular fort made of earth. It was on high ground. It would allow the Americans to shoot from a covered position. But they still had to cover the flanks on either side of the peninsula, north and south. So they begin to build some trench works on either side. And come morning of June 17th, the British find out what's going on, and Howe says, fine, shell them out of there. Basically just start sending cannonballs and force them off that high ground. And so a British ship, actually moves into position. Some British cannon in Boston. These two positions begin to fire on the Americans as they're digging and building and doing all these things to get ready for a battle. Now, most of the Americans are okay, but a couple Americans do die, and it's pretty horrific. So a cannonball actually hits, bounces, and takes a guy's head off.
Oh my God.
Another cannonball takes a guy's leg off. This freaks out the soldiers that are digging.
Okay.
So
At Breed
two
Hill still.
regiments actually begin to leave.
Okay.
They send 3 new regiments in. So they have 3 regiments of soldiers that are there, and they're ready. Some people are not behind any walls or anything like that, and they're moving towards the beach. Then there are others that are on the hill, and there are others that are on the other side, and they're ready to go. So William Howe decides, fine, that's where they are, that's where we'll fight, which is exactly what the Americans wanted. And so Howe lands a regiment of light infantry, a regiment of grenadiers. He brings 2,300 soldiers to that peninsula, 2,300. And he begins an assault on the position there.
Wow. And what happened? Does that then lead to, how do we get to Bunker Hill?
I love it. You won't let it go.
Let's keep going.
Oh, no. So I'm just going to spoil it for you. It's the Battle of Breed's Hill that we misnamed.
Ah, nice.
We never fight on Bunker Hill.
How did that happen?
It never happened.
Historian, how did that happen?
I don't know. It's not my fault. I didn't. Look, if you go there's a monument to the whole battle. Lay it on them.
Yeah.
I didn't do
Does
it.
the monument at Breed's Hill say Battle of Bunker
I think
Hill?
it says Battle of Bunker Hill.
Really?
Yes.
That's so interesting.
So basically what happens is
all the
Israel-
paperwork said Bunker Hill, so that's what they stuck with, because that's where they were supposed to
That's
go.
where they were supposed to be, and I guess we didn't want to admit we were wrong.
That is fascinating.
Israel Putnam is on Bunker Hill. He's actually bringing soldiers in to reinforce the soldiers that are fighting during the battle. But all of the fighting happens at Breed's Hill.
Okay.
There are 3 assaults that the British make on that position. Howe is not stupid. He knows what he's doing. He attempts to flank the position to the north. But there are 3 really cool guys there who won't let him succeed. Seth Pomeroy, Thomas Knowlton, and John Stark. Now, is anybody here from New Hampshire or no? John Stark, New Hampshire guy. He is amazing. So John Stark and Thomas Knowlton were Rangers during the French and Indian War. And they are put in charge of regiments from their states. Knowlton is from Connecticut. Stark is from New Hampshire. Along with them is this 70-year-old guy named Seth Pomeroy. Now, Seth was a major in the French and Indian War. He fought at the Battle of Lake George in 1755. He fought at the Battle of Louisbourg in 1745. He's just there as a private. He was a regimental commander at the end of the 7 Years' War, a colonel, but they wanted to give him an honorary position as general, and he's like, I don't have any soldiers to command. I'll just fight as a private, thank you very much. And he is fighting under John Stark's command, right there on a rail fence with a musket. They repel the British light infantry 3 times as they try to flank that position.
Wow.
And they finally give up. So Howe sends his grenadiers on a frontal assault of Breed's Hill. 2 times they're repelled. At one point, they are shot so close but so fiercely that their bodies are reported to have been thrown back by the gunfire from the Americans.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Howe loses all of his staff officers. All of them. So he regathers his men, and he says, we're going to take them this time. He doesn't know it, but the Americans are running out of ammunition. Some of the soldiers had fired 30 times. Howe says, this time, we will keep moving forward. I don't care how many of the men fall. We will bayonet them out of that position. And so they fix bayonets, and they march up the hill, and the Americans fire, but the soldiers keep coming. But at this point, the Americans are out of ammunition. And they don't all have bayonets. Some of them have tomahawks. Some of them have bayonets. Many of them do what's called clubbing their muskets. So they basically grab the front end, and they're going to just beat them with the butt end of the weapon as a club. Men volunteer to stay in the redoubt so that the rest of the soldiers can retreat to Bunker Hill. And the British enter into the fort. And the fighting ends there. But the British have lost so many soldiers. Howe took 40% casualties that day. 40%.
Wow.
That is roughly 600 to 800 wounded and killed. He is affected by this for the rest of the war.
Okay.
There are stories about Howe being very hesitant through the rest of the war, and many believe it is the effect of that battle on him because he lost so many men.
Wow.
And because he lost so many, he doesn't break out of Boston. He actually has to go back into Boston again, and there he sits.
And is this after this happens, is this the inspiration for the Continental Congress, and now we're going to form the Continental Army, or when does this happen, the Continental Army?
Well, so that while that's going on outside of Boston,
Yeah.
you have a whole nother political drama that's happening in Philadelphia. So in May of 1774, the First Continental Congress is formed in response to the Coercive Acts. When they adjourn in the fall of 1774, they agree to reconvene as the Second Continental Congress in May of 1775. In May of 1775, when they reconvene at the State House in Pennsylvania, among the Virginia delegates, you have George Washington showing up. He's a member of the House of Burgesses. He has fought in the French and Indian War. In fact, he was a regimental commander in the French and Indian War. So he has a lot of experience. In fact, he has more experience than any other American on the continent during that period of time. He shows up in his old uniform from the French and Indian War. Now, some people think he's doing that because he's vying for a position, but that's not the case. He's signaling his support for military resistance to what the British are doing in Boston. It's like wearing a shirt that says something political on it, and that means that you're supporting that political position. That's what he's doing. He's not vying for a position. So when he shows up in May, the Continental Congress begins to debate what to do about all these soldiers that are outside of Boston. Mm-hmm. And by June 14th, the decision is made that the Continental Congress should assume command of all of those forces because, quite honestly, they want to control it.
Yeah.
You know, they're not all that willing to just let Massachusetts start another global war.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They would like to have some say in how that's going to happen.
Sure.
And so they assume command of that military force, and they name it the Continental Army.
And that is made up of who's involved in this? I mean, is this all of the colonies at this point?
Because well, all of the colonies agree to take control, but all of the soldiers are from New England.
Right.
So there are no soldiers from Georgia, there are no soldiers from South Carolina, or from Virginia, or from even Pennsylvania, even New York. It is just New England colonies that make up these forces at this point in time. But Massachusetts and Connecticut and New Hampshire and Rhode Island all agree, their delegates agree at the Continental Congress that the Congress should take control.
Was there any stress there? I mean, was that an easy agreement for them?
Oh, that was a very easy agreement for them.
They were ready to have.
Because they want all the other colonies to support
Sure.
them.
Yeah.
Right? So if Virginia now has a part in controlling the Continental Army, they have skin in the game.
Yeah.
If they don't, they may not. And they're trying to get the southern colonies more involved. I mean, obviously, they're involved with political rhetoric, and they're saying they support Patrick Henry, give me liberty, give me, all of that is, the rhetoric is there, but show me the money, right? Give me the forces, bring some soldiers up there. They haven't done any of that.
Yeah, I have to believe there were people, some of the southern colonies, or, it doesn't matter where they were, but, you've got 13 essential organizations, economic forces you're talking about, right. And suddenly they're all deciding to go and, fight this battle up in the northeast or New England area. And was there not resistance from some of those colonies saying, well, I don't know if we want to be part of the, I don't know.
Well, just to be clear, right, South Carolina never sends a regiment to Boston.
Okay.
All right, what happens is the southern colonies agree to raise regiments to defend the South.
Ah, okay.
Pennsylvania and Virginia agree to send some soldiers up to Boston, but a lot of people are now getting worried about defending New York City. So there are actually regiments that are going to begin to move into New York City because they're worried about that, which, again, we can get to at another time.
Yeah.
And down in Charleston and in that region, they're worried about defending that port because that would be very important for the British as well. Mm-hmm. And then in Virginia, they're worried about defending on the frontier. There's a lot of native peoples that they are either allied to or not that they are worried about as well.
Yeah.
So there's more concerns than just Boston.
Yeah.
Boston is the hotspot of the moment. And that's where the largest contingent of what is now the Continental Army is going to, that's where they are.
Yeah.
They're going to need to get a commander up there to take charge of that. But in the southern department and the middle department, they're going to be forming their own forces so that they can defend their own interests as well. Right.
That makes sense. Everybody has some sort of specific reason to their region to be part of what's happening.
Right.
And so, we're going to run out of time shortly, but before we do, I want to sort of tie it back into this area. How do we get back? What's happening in this area during that time period?
Okay, so all of the colonies are beginning to figure out what they're going to defend, how they're going to defend, where they're going to resist the British. In New York, it's no different. New York City is a key port. They're very worried about defending that, and they have very good reasons to be worried, which will happen in 1776. But they also want to defend the Hudson Highlands. They know that the Hudson River is a highway. They know they can get all the way from New York City to Quebec by water almost completely by going up the Hudson River and then jumping over into Lake Champlain and then going from there. And the Hudson Highlands, as we discussed back in February, is a prime place to defend. Mm-hmm. So in May of 1775, the New York Assembly decides that it's going to put a committee together. We're going to defend by committee. So we're going to get a committee together. They're going to decide where the best place is to defend in the Hudson Highlands. James Clinton, who is a son of New York, he's from the Highlands. He's a colonel in the New York militia. They give him the job. He takes his wife and his family, and they decide they're going to spend a beautiful June weekend up in the Highlands from the 2nd until the 10th. And while doing so, he'll do a little surveying and figure out where the best place is to defend. he decides that West Point is the best place to defend. He tells the committee that West Point is the best place to defend. The committee then goes looking for a military engineer. There are none. We don't have an engineering school. We don't have any engineers around, but there's this guy, right? There's always this guy. So there's this guy. His name is Bernard Romans. He's a Dutchman turned Englishman. He's a botanist who read an engineering book. He's looking for a job, and he raises his hand, says, I can do it. I got it. The committee says, great. Thank you for your service. Bernard Romans then goes, looks at West Point, and says, I don't think so. I think I'd rather build a place on Matler's Rock. Now, Matler's Rock doesn't, well, no, it exists, but we don't call it that anymore. We call it Constitution Island, right? So he decides he's going to build a fort on Constitution Island, which he does, which he calls Fort Constitution. He does it completely behind the back of the committee. He actually goes back to New York City, goes to the assembly and says, I've got a better plan, and I think the committee's going to agree to it. And the assembly says, okay, go. And he does. The committee then looks at it and goes, this is terrible. It's a terrible position. West Point overlooks and is higher than the island. So the fort is now cannot see south, which is where the British are coming from. And all they have to do is disembark soldiers, put them on West Point, take some cannon, put it there, and the position is completely untenable. However, he's already started.
Yeah.
So the assembly's like, well, he's already started. And they let him finish. He names it Fort Constitution. That's why the island is called Constitution Island. And for now, we'll just leave it at he's building.
And what's the time frame that that's happening? Are we talking
so that
months?
starts that starts in July and is ongoing into November through December.
Okay. And for a lot more on that, you can watch our first episode of Cannons and Cocktails over at Fort Beacon Studios YouTube channel. So check that out. So I want to ask some, we have a little bit of time for Q&A, but before we do, I'm curious to know, Sean, in this chapter that we're talking about,
yeah.
What is one thing from your perspective that it had shifted just ever so slightly, our entire history would be completely different?
Oh, I think if George Washington hadn't been selected to be the commander.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do.
And he didn't want it, right? That was part of the story that he didn't
he didn't want the job.
Yeah.
He wanted to be in the military, don't get me wrong. He wanted to fight, but he didn't want the responsibility of being in charge of all of it. But I believe because the other people that were being thought of would have, in my opinion, been terrible.
Who were the other people?
So you had John Hancock. I love the man. He's a pirate. Who doesn't like a pirate, right? I mean, he's running guns and rum and sugar. Like, I love him, right? But I don't think he would have been any good as a commander of the army. The other one, who Washington actually supports, is Charles Lee. Charles Lee is a former British officer who joins the American Army. He's not a nice person. There are words, but we're being filmed. He's a jerk. I don't know of any other way to put it. Okay. He even says he's a jerk.
Are they campaigning for this opportunity? Do they want to do it? Or
Charles Lee wants the job.
Yeah, interesting.
But John Adams and Benjamin Franklin are absolutely adamant it has to be George Washington. He's the most famous American-born military leader out of the French and Indian War. He's from Virginia. He'll bring in the South. He's a proven organizer of armies. He's the right guy for the job. And you know, John Hancock has his feelings hurt a little bit that John Adams doesn't support him. He's two Massachusetts guys, you know, he kind of is hoping. Sam Adams is a John Hancock fan solely because he's from Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. But Benjamin Franklin and John Adams recognize that they need to bring the South in.
Yeah.
But history will show us why Charles Lee would have been terrible as a choice. John Hancock is a much better politician.
Why would Charles Lee have been terrible as a choice?
Well, we'll get to it later.
Besides being a jerk.
But I mean, a
lot of leaders are jerks.
Charles Lee just never really buys into the idea that the Continental Army can stand up to the British Army. He's a supporter of the American cause, but he is not a believer in the American fighting soldier.
Interesting.
He believes the British soldier will always win. And he makes decisions on the battlefield at different times that shows that he does not trust them. And in fact, at the Battle of Monmouth in 1778, you will see that he does not obey George Washington's commands in terms of fighting against Henry Clinton outside of Philadelphia. He basically tries to make the army retreat. Washington goes apoplectic, actually runs in front of Charles Lee, calls him a traitor and a coward.
Oh, wow.
Actually is riding up and down to rally the soldiers, gets shot at multiple times in an attempt to turn everybody around. He succeeds. He gives command to Lafayette, who he loves.
Yeah.
Lafayette then leads the charge, and the Battle of Monmouth is a success. So I just think that, sure, we get to, kind of use hindsight as historians, but I think there's plenty of reason there to believe that if Charles Lee had been put in charge, it would not have been the right move.
Interesting. Great answer. All right, so now it's your turn. We have time for a couple of questions. Dimitri.
So at this point where they select George Washington, there's a spy network that was his network at some point in time. And was that already sort of at the beginnings of its operation with communications and that, or did this happen afterwards?
You're talking about a spy network for Washington?
Yeah.
Yeah, when he's chosen, is this happening during that time?
So those spy networks are already at play. They may not be as robust as they become later on, and in fact, Washington will build a more robust spy network in New York and then in Philadelphia and other places. But it's already there; they're already using it.
Quick follow-up: where is Benedict Arnold in the mix?
You can learn more about that on the first episode of Cannons and Cocktails over on the Fort Beacon Studios channel on YouTube.
No, that's fine. Let me just say briefly. First, he's at Fort Ticonderoga. Then he comes back, and then he gets sent on a special mission north.
Excellent. Another question, Linda.
I'm always really curious about the horse riders for the one by land, two by sea. And, as a woman who doesn't see many women in history, I know in Ludington, Connecticut, right up the road, there was a female rider. But
Yes, that's right.
Why does Paul Revere, because there was such a series of them,
Yeah.
why is he the singular?
I love this. It's such a good.
Yes. So the question is, I'm going to try to recap for you, Linda. Paul Revere is the one who's known for the one if by land, two if by sea, British are coming moment, right? We literally had this conversation today. Why is he, when especially there were all these other people, most notably a woman from London, Connecticut? Ludington. Okay. 30 miles up the, so there were a lot of really interesting people involved in this, but yet Paul Revere's the one who's known as the single individual, quite frankly. That's the little storybook growing up. So why is that?
Oh, yeah.
Colonel Sculley.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I think it's because he's the most famous. So, I know that, but
Leading up to the
I'm going to
moment.
go into a little bit more detail than that. Paul Revere is one of 5 or 6 leaders of the Sons of Liberty in Boston. He is the one who puts himself in danger more than any of the others. Many of them are more political, or they work behind the scenes. They agitate from a position of their writing or whatever. Paul Revere is a silversmith. So he's working class. Many of these are not working class men. Samuel Adams has put himself into politics. Joseph Warren is a doctor. Many of them are lawyers. Paul Revere is an artisan. So he's working class. He has the political support of the working class of the North End, because the Northeast and the Southeast don't like one another, right? So yeah. So he's got the support of the North End. And he also writes and creates engravings. He's the one who makes the Boston Massacre. It's not the Boston Massacre before that, it's him. So he's a publicist of sorts as well. I think if you take all of that into consideration, it becomes very easy for him to become a subject of like Washington Irving or, any of those other writers of the time that then make him famous and make him the symbol for all of those various people. But it's a great question.
How many writers there were?
How many writers were there? Do we know?
Actually, I don't know the exact number, but I do know the book where I can find that number, and I will find it for you. Now, so because you're so interested in this, seriously.
Well, I see you in the morning.
I know, but David Hackett Fisher wrote a fantastic book called Paul Revere's Ride, and you would think it's about Paul Revere, and it is, but it's also about all of the writers. And I will actually go to the book and find all of the different writers. He talks about all of it, and it's a wonderful read. It won the Bancroft Award. It's not nearly as boring as some other history books can.
Essentially, he was a very good PR person, is what it sounds like. All right, one more question. There in the back, please. All the way in the back.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is about the Quartering Act in specific. And the question is whether or not what was happening is that people were paying for barracks to be built, or whether or not they were actually housing soldiers in their own home and thereby being taxed because they had to. And the answer is both. But private soldiers are most often not going into people's homes. So particularly in New York City, they're forced to pay for barracks to be erected for the private soldiers. And then the officers would have been allowed to occupy people's homes and stay in their homes. So it was a little of both.
Yeah, which is another thing you can imagine, how incredibly strange and challenging that must have been, just to have that kind of experience. All right, Colonel Sculley, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. We're going to leave it there.
Hey, I just want to, thank you. I just want to say to everybody, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for being interested in this topic. And hopefully you've had fun. Hopefully you will be interested in more stories moving forward. What I'd like to do is every so often come back and just revisit another 250th anniversary as we move forward. There's a lot of stories here. There's a lot to talk about. But I just want to say thank you for showing up. I really appreciate it.
We are so incredibly fortunate here to have you and to have you share this with us. Thank you for making it so interesting and intriguing. I want to give another big, giant shout out to Dennings Point Distillery and Alana. Please take very, very good care of Alana. I want to give another really quick shout out to the Destination Duchess, our amazing Destination Duchess team. There's this really awesome Commander and Cheers campaign they have going on. Get one of these coasters wherever you can find them, and there's a very cool QR code experience, so you got to check that out. And then another shout out to the Beacon Historical Society for this really awesome brochure they put together. That's all about the Revolution 250 here in our area. There's some in the back. Please just get one right now per family. There's more printing on the way. And you can find out more at beaconhistorical.org. And don't forget that all of your donations that go in the box will go directly to the Beacon Historical Society. Thank you all so much. It's such a pleasure. We will see you again very soon. Cheers.
Cheers.